welcome back. I hope you all are enjoying this journey together um, on qualitative research methodologies. In today's video, I'm going to talk about sampling strategies that researchers who are doing qualitative research adopt in their studies. But before we jump in and talk about some of those strategies, let's talk briefly about what is sampling and why sampling is important. So, as you know, in research, as a researchers, we have limited resource. So, if I want to do a study on a population, let's say of 1 million people, and if I start collecting data from 1 million people, it requires a lot of energy, resource, finance to do the study, and a lot of time too. So what researchers do, they shortlist, they select a representative sample from that whole population, and then they conduct the study on those people. And we hope that what we found in that small sample is applied to the whole population. So sampling is a strategy to pick and choose the people from the whole population and then implementing those study or maybe collecting data from those people. So that's what sampling is. And another thing to keep in mind, why sampling is important. Sampling is important because if you don't choose the right person in the process of data collection, then the data quality that you collect is poor, it's not good. And when the data is not of good quality, then what happens? The findings, the results that came out of the data obviously is going to be compromised. Your findings are as good as the data that you collect. And that's why it's very important for a researcher, whether you are a quantitative researcher or qualitative researcher, to think deeply about what sampling strategy is going to be effective, how you can get the best data that you want for your study. How could you collect data which is easily can be done, can be collected, and also the quality is good. So it's very important to consider your sampling strategy as it is directly related to the quality of the data and hence the findings of your study too. Now, another thing to keep in mind is the sampling strategies in quantitative studies are different from qualitative studies. Why? Because the purpose is very different. The purpose of a quantitative study is to generalize the findings on the whole population. So let's say if the total population is 1 million and I'm doing a sampling of, let's say, 500 people out of 1 million, then what results, what findings that came out from that 500 sample size will be applicable, can be generalized to those 1 million people, meaning that quantitative studies are focused on generalizability of the findings, while the qualitative studies are not focused on generalization of the findings, The focus of a qualitative study is to deeply understand a phenomenon in depth, in its totality. So, the focus of a qualitative study is not seeking generalization. In fact, a qualitative researcher is focused on understanding a phenomenon with its all complexities, with all its factors and variables, and that is why a large sample size is not feasible in qualitative studies. So in quant study you have large sample size, while in qualitative studies you have a small sample size. And why? As I said, that your focus is not on generalization of your findings. Your focus is understanding the phenomenon with all its complexities and variables and factors. So you may have already seen that in quantitative studies, you can see a sample size somewhere between 50 to thousands, like 10,000s or even more. While in qualitative studies, since the focus is more about understanding in depth about a phenomenon, you start with the sample size could be anywhere between one participant to maximum I have seen in qualitative studies is like 30, approx 30 participants. So somewhere between one participant to 30 participants. Most of the studies, depending on their research design, they have somewhere between 4, 5 to maybe 12, 15 participants. And again, the reason is because the focus is not on generalization. The focus is on understanding the phenomenon in its complexity, in its depth, and that's why you cannot do a large sample study in qualitative, because you want to go more in depth rather than generalizing the findings. So that's briefly about the sample size that we see in qualitative study. Small sample size, as the studies are more focused on going deeper and understanding all the complexities. Now, so that's briefly about what is sample, why sample is important, and how sample looks like in qualitative studies. Now let's talk about some of the common strategies being used in qualitative research. Here in this video we are not talking about sampling strategies in quantitative studies, and there are many kinds of strategies being used, but here we are only focusing on sampling strategies adopted in qualitative study. So the first strategy, which is very popular strategy used in qualitative study, we call it purposive sampling or purposeful sampling strategy. Purposeful sampling, as the name itself suggests, that it is purposeful. The researcher has identified certain purposes of the study, and when a researcher is deciding whom to interview, whom to observe, where to collect data from, you keep that purpose drive your selection process. So your purpose of the study drives your selection of research participants. So based on what is your purpose, what is your research question, you think about who can provide you the information, the experience, the perceptions, the social process you are looking for, and then you choose people who really fit in that purpose, and that's the reason why we call it purposive sampling strategies. As a researcher, you think about the characteristics of the people who you think can provide you more rich and thick description of the phenomenon that you are investigating. So you are focused on who can provide a rich and thick description of the phenomenon. And then based on the purpose, you decide who can provide you that rich and thick description of the phenomenon, and then you shortlist and select participant based on the criteria. Let's understand this with an example, and then it will make it more clear. Let's say I am interested in understanding experiences of farmers who are shifted toward organic farming practices, and I want to understand their experience and maybe some challenges that they might be facing in this transition from traditional farming practices to organic farming practices. So let's see how this really determines the people I talk to. So let me first write the purpose statement. The purpose of this study is to explore experiences and challenges that, let's say, small scale farmers to explore experiences and challenges the small scale farmers face while transitioning to organic farming practices. So that's the purpose of this qualitative study. As a researcher, I want to understand when farmers who are, let's say, who were engaged in conventional farming practices, when they are shifting toward organic farming practices, what are some challenges and they experience, what are their experiences in that transition phase. So that's the purpose of the study, and this purpose will drive my selection of the participants. So I'm thinking about, based on the purpose of my study, who can provide me a rich, thick description of this phenomenon that I'm investigating here. So first thing to keep in mind, I'm interested in understanding small scale farmers, you see. So small scale farmers and not medium scale or large scale. So that's my first inclusion criteria, small scale farmers. I'm not going to interview and talk to farmers who are doing organic farming or transitioning towards organic farming practices and who have, let's say, a medium scale or a large scale farming scale. So I'm only interested in a small scale farmer. So that will drive my selection of the participant I'm going to talk to. Second thing is transitioning to organic farming practices. So I am going to talk to people, in this case farmers, who are transitioning or may already have transitioned. Transitioning or already transitioned or thinking about transitioning. You see? So I will talk to, because I want to understand the experiences and challenges. So a farmer who is still considering, thinking, planning to transition from conventional to organic practices, farmers who are in the process of transitioning. So they started this transition, they are somewhere in the middle of this transition, and some farmers who already have transitioned recently, so they have completely shifted from conventional farming practices to organic farming practices. So these are the three people, group of people, farmers, who can provide me in-depth experience, thick and rich description of the experience related to this transition from conventional farming practices to organic farming practices. So you see, when you purposive sampling strategy is your purpose statement drives the selection of participants, and you ask yourself, based on what you want to answer with your research, who is the best fit, who can give you the best description, experience related to the phenomenon. So that's briefly about this strategy of purposive sampling or purposeful sampling. Now let's talk about another common strategy which is adopted by qualitative researchers when they conduct their studies. And that strategy is called convenience sampling. Convenience sampling is sometimes adopted in quantitative research as well, but mostly this strategy is useful for qualitative researchers. All right, so let's start with another strategy, which is convenience sampling. As the name itself suggests, this strategy is about selecting participants who are conveniently, easily available, accessible to the researcher. And this strategy is useful for novice researchers, maybe doctoral students. And the reason why I'm saying that is, as a new researcher, as a student researcher, you may not have the funding, resources, both time and money available at your disposal for conducting research. So because let's say if I'm going to interview people who are living in another city, so if I'm driving there, obviously I'm spending money on my housing, lodging, transportation, and all these charges. If I am advertising in a newspaper or on a social media platform or any other online platform, and some of those platforms might charge money to put that advertisement for the recruitment of participant. So sampling sometimes obviously requires some resources, but So as a doctoral student, you may not have the resources. As a new student, as a novice researcher, you may not have that resources. So in that situation, in that condition, convenience sampling is helpful. So as a qualitative researcher, you can start talking to or sampling people who are easily accessible to you. I did one study as a doc student, and I was interested in understanding how counselors, therapists, how they experience empathy and compassion in their therapy when they are with their clients. And I was a doc student, obviously poor. So what I did for my study, the place where I was living in, it was a small university town, and I just looked at how many counselors, therapists are working in this small town, and there were like 2, 3 counselors, therapists practicing there. I approached them and shared that, I'm doing this study. Would you be interested in participating in this study? And they helped me by being ready to be interviewed. So that was easily accessible. So my decision to choose and interview research participants were mostly driven by the convenience and accessibility. So the convenience sampling is about what is easily accessible, what is conveniently accessible to a researcher. And this technique, as you could see, is useful for students who may not have resources for sampling. Another strategy which is commonly used in qualitative research, and it is called snowball sampling. So let's look into this one too. Snowball sampling. What is snowball sampling? Snowball sampling refers to a strategy where, let's say, you started as a researcher, you talked to one research participant, okay? And you talked to this person, you interviewed this person, you collected data from this person, research participant, and then you ask this person, like, could you tell me, based on your own network, do you know anyone who you think might be interested in participating in this study? And this person might give you a reference of another person who might be interested, and maybe let's say a couple of more people. And then you talk to these another 2 participants, and let's say they agreed to be interviewed for data, and you collected data from these 2 people too. And then as you are talking to these 2 people, you also ask the same question like, hey, I wonder if you could support me in recruiting some more research participant for my study. And let's say this person says, oh, I know another friend who might be interested in this study. And this person, let's say, also gives you another reference. So you see how this is happening. You start with one participant, and this one participant gave you some references, and then those people also provided you some references. So that's how this process goes. So you start with one, and you get references from the people you are interviewing, and this is called snowball sampling. This strategy is very helpful also, particularly in the context of if you are studying something, a phenomenon which is very difficult to find participants. I remember one study where what we were doing, we were studying elder financial abuse by their power of attorney agents. And in most cases, these power of attorneys were their own children, relatives, close family members. So what happened, we started with one or two participants because sometimes people, because of the nature of this phenomenon, people don't want to come out and talk. So we advertise this research and through flyers and other mediums. And we initially found some people who were ready to be interviewed. And then we ask these people like, hey, do you know anyone else who you think might be interested in participating in this study? So the people whom we initially interviewed, they were part of kind of a support group, a social support group that was meant to support elders who are victims of financial abuse by their power of attorney. And so they connected us with that support group, which helped us further to recruit more participants. In social sciences studies, depending on the topic that you are exploring, snowball sampling can be a very effective tool to find more participants for your study. So today in this video, we talked about 3 strategies that qualitative researchers use in their study. The first one we talked about purposive sampling or purposeful sampling. The second one we talked is convenience sampling. And finally, the third one, snowball sampling. In the next video, I'll talk more about some other strategies that researchers in qualitative tradition use to recruit participants. I hope it all makes more sense to you now after listening to all these different strategies. If you got any questions, let me know and I'll be glad to help you. Have a good day.